All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive today into something that, I'll admit, might sound a bit dry at first, depreciation. But stick with us, because we're going to explore how the rate at which things wear out, factories, machines, all that industrial stuff, can actually have a huge impact on how competitive whole industries become. Think about things like space travel or renewable energy, sectors we all rely on. We're basing this deep dive on a 2024 research paper published in the International Economic Review. Really interesting stuff. And we're going to break down some of the key findings and see how they play out using examples that, well, I think you'll find pretty relevant to your life.
Yeah.
So to get us started, could you give us a quick overview of the paper's main finding? What exactly did these researchers discover?
Yeah. So what really jumped out at me was this strong connection they found between how fast capital depreciates in an industry and the amount of market power that the companies in that industry have. They use this measure called markup, which basically tells us how much companies can charge above their actual cost of production. And usually higher markups mean less competition. So fewer companies are kind of calling the shots,
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. For someone who's not an economist, what exactly does a markup tell us? And how does it relate to this idea of depreciation influencing competition?
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point to clarify. Markups are essentially how much extra a company can charge for a product on top of what it actually costs them to make it. So a higher markup means they have more pricing power, often because there's less competition to keep those prices, in check. Now, what this research found was that industries where equipment and machinery wear out faster, meaning they have higher depreciation rates, tend to have higher markups too. It's like this hidden factor that's shaping the competitive landscape.
Okay, this is where my mind starts to get blown because I never really thought about something like depreciation having such a big impact. It seems so accounting focused. But you're saying it could actually determine which companies survive and thrive in an entire industry.
Exactly. And it all comes down to the cost of doing business. Think about it this way. Higher depreciation means companies have to replace their equipment more frequently, right?
Yeah.
So that means higher costs. And those higher costs translate into a higher cost of capital. And essentially, how much it costs a company to operate and invest.
So if you're a new company wanting to enter an industry where, everything is constantly breaking down and needing replacement, you're already starting at a disadvantage because your costs are going to be so much higher. Is that what creates this barrier to entry that the paper talks about?
That's exactly it. New companies, especially startups, might simply not be able to afford to compete in industries with high depreciation rates. It's like a hidden entry fee that keeps the playing field tilted in favor of the big established players who can absorb those higher costs.
This is fascinating. It's like a whole new way of looking at competition. We usually think about things like patents or technology as those big barriers to entry, but you're saying depreciation can be just as powerful a force.
Absolutely. And they saw this evidence of this playing out in real-world industries. One of the examples they highlighted in the paper was the space industry.
Okay, space travel. Now, that's something I can wrap my head around a little easier than abstract economic models.
Yeah.
How does depreciation factor into the world of rockets and satellites and all that?
Well, for a long time, rockets were basically single use. They were incredibly expensive to build and, gone in a flash of fire after just one launch.
Yeah.
That meant enormous depreciation costs.
Right.
Yeah. And as we discussed, high depreciation creates a very high barrier to entry. Only companies with very deep pockets could afford to play in that game.
So that explains why the space industry for so long was dominated by just a handful of giant companies. But we've seen some new players emerge in recent years, haven't we? Like SpaceX, for example.
Exactly. And a big part of that shift can be attributed to the rise of reusable rockets. So suddenly, instead of being a single-use item, a rocket can be flown multiple times. And what does that do to the depreciation rate? It plummets.
Right.
And what happens when depreciation goes down? The barrier to entry lowers, making it possible for companies like SpaceX to enter the market and really shake things up.
So reusability equals less depreciation equals more competition. It's almost a simple equation when you think about it that way.
It really is. And it shows how even seemingly technological advancements can have these profound economic impacts, all tied back to this often overlooked concept of depreciation. But the researchers didn't just focus on the space industry. They looked at a at a wide range of sectors, comparing industries with vastly different depreciation rates to see how it impacted their structure.
Okay, give me another example.
Right.
What other industries did they compare, and what did they find?
Well, one comparison they made in the paper that I found particularly striking was between resin manufacturing and the soap and toiletries industries.
Now, those seem like pretty different industries at first glance. Why choose those two specifically?
Because it allowed the researchers to control for other factors that could be influencing competition. Both industries involve chemicals, manufacturing processes, and both have similar levels of R&D spending, which is often a proxy for fixed costs. But the key difference lies in their depreciation rates.
Okay, so help me visualize this. Resin manufacturing, I'm picturing like those big vats and reactors. That equipment probably lasts a while, right? But soap and toiletries, I mean, think about the packaging, the ingredients, how quickly trends change. That stuff has to turn over way faster, so the depreciation would be higher.
You got it. And what they found was that soap and toiletries, the industry with the higher depreciation rate, actually had much higher markups, meaning less competition. This suggests that even though they had similar fixed costs in terms of R&D, the rate at which their capital depreciated was a major factor in shaping their competitive landscape.
This is really making me rethink my whole understanding of how industries work. We've always talked about things like R&D costs or big marketing campaigns as those big barriers to entry. But you're saying, hey, don't forget about how quickly your stuff wears out. That matters too.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But they didn't just stop at finding this correlation in the real world. To really test their theory, they went a step further and built an economic model to see if they could simulate this relationship between depreciation and market power.
Wait, so they built like a virtual economy?
Essentially, yes. They created a model that allowed them to tweak different variables, including depreciation rates for different industries. And what they found was remarkable. Just by varying the depreciation rate in their model, they were able to replicate real-world markups incredibly well.
That's really impressive. So their model essentially confirmed that depreciation is playing a huge role in shaping how competitive industries become.
Exactly. And it highlighted something that traditional economic models, which often focus solely on fixed costs, hadn't fully captured before: the impact of depreciation on the optimal size of firms.
Okay, now you've thrown another new term at me, optimal firm size. Can you explain what that means and how it relates to depreciation?
Of course. Optimal firm size basically refers to the most efficient size for a company to operate at within a particular industry, given things like cost and market conditions.
So is this saying that depreciation can actually limit how big a company can grow?
In a way, yes. Their model showed that higher depreciation rates, even when holding markups constant, tended to lead to smaller firms. Think about it this way. If you're constantly having to replace expensive equipment, it limits your ability to reinvest profits back into growth, right?
Yeah.
You're essentially stuck on this treadmill of maintenance and replacement.
So it's not just about how much money you need to get started. It's about how much you need to keep spending just to stay in the game. High depreciation means you're constantly replacing equipment, which limits your growth potential compared to an industry where things last longer. And the best part, the researchers actually found evidence for this size difference in real-world data. They observed that, holding markups constant, industries with higher depreciation rates tended to have smaller firms, which further supports their model. This is wild. We're starting to see how this seemingly mundane accounting concept can have profound implications on entire industries. But we've got to talk about the elephant in the room. Well, what does this all mean for policymakers? There's this common belief that subsidizing entry into industries, basically giving new companies financial help to get started, increases competition and benefits the economy. But does this research challenge that idea?
It definitely adds a new layer of complexity to the conversation about subsidies and how we promote competition. You see, this model suggests that when depreciation is the main culprit behind low competition, simply subsidizing entry might not be the most effective solution.
Hold on, so you're saying that giving companies free money might not always be the best solution? That seems almost counterintuitive.
Well, it's not quite that simple. The point is we need to understand the underlying reasons for a lack of competition before we jump to solutions. If high depreciation is creating that barrier to entry, subsidies might not address the root problem.
I see. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. So we need to be more strategic about how we think about these issues.
Exactly. Their model even showed that in some cases, subsidies could actually make things worse in industries with high depreciation rates.
My mind is officially blown. How could that even be possible?
Well, we'll dive deeper into those nuances when we come back. But essentially, it has to do with how subsidies might create artificial incentives that distort the market in the long run. And that, my friend, is a key takeaway for our listeners. We can't just assume that throwing money at a problem is going to magically fix it. We need to understand the underlying dynamics at play.
Okay, this has been an incredible start to our deep dive. We've gone from this seemingly boring concept of depreciation to understanding its profound impact on industries and even like policy decisions. I can't wait to hear more about those potential downsides of subsidies when we come back.
Yeah.
It's definitely making me rethink a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. Welcome back.
Right. Before the break, we were talking about how subsidies, basically giving companies, financial assistance, might not always be the most effective way to boost competition, especially in industries where depreciation is a major factor.
Precisely. You see, the research suggests that in some cases, subsidies can actually create unintended consequences that distort the market and might even hinder competition in the long run.
Okay, I'm all ears. How could giving companies money actually make competition worse? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, one concern is that subsidies can create a sort of artificial safety net for companies. They might become reliant on that external support instead of focusing on, improving their own efficiency or finding innovative ways to reduce those high depreciation costs.
So it's like giving a company a crutch instead of teaching them how to walk on their own. Yeah. They might never develop the skills or the strategies they need to truly thrive in a competitive market.
That's a great analogy. And in the long run, this reliance on subsidies can actually make those companies less competitive, especially on a global scale. They might struggle to adapt and innovate if those subsidies ever go away.
I see. It's like creating a bubble that eventually bursts. Are there any other potential downsides to subsidies in these cases?
Yes. Another concern is that subsidies can sometimes lead to overcapacity in an industry. If you artificially lower the cost of entry through subsidies, you might end up with too many players all, vying for a limited market share.
Okay, so picture this. We have all these companies, all with this expensive equipment that's constantly breaking down because of high depreciation. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can certainly create challenges. You might see price wars, companies operating at a loss, and ultimately some of those companies failing. And it's important to remember that subsidies are ultimately funded by taxpayers. So if they're not used effectively, it can be a drain on public resources without achieving the desired outcome of increased competition.
This raises a crucial question then. If subsidies aren't always the best solution, especially in these high depreciation industries, what are the alternatives? How else can we promote competition and make those markets work better?
That's a great question, and it's one that requires a more nuanced and strategic approach than simply handing out financial assistance.
Okay, walk me through some of those potential alternatives. What could a more effective approach actually look like?
Well, one promising avenue is to focus on incentivizing companies to invest in technologies and practices that actually reduce those depreciation rates. Mm-hmm. Instead of just helping them cope with the high cost, we encourage them to find ways to lower those costs in the first place.
So it's like we're shifting from a reactive approach to a more proactive one. Instead of just treating the symptoms, we're addressing the root cause. What could that look like in practice?
Well, there are a few different levers policymakers could pull. For example, they could offer tax breaks for companies that invest in R&D focused on durable materials or more efficient manufacturing processes. Or they could create accelerated depreciation allowances, which would allow companies to write off the cost of new, longer-lasting equipment more quickly.
So instead of directly funding new businesses through subsidies, we're encouraging companies to make their stuff last longer. That makes a lot of sense. It's like we're rewarding them for being proactive about depreciation.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that encourages innovation and efficiency, and it aligns with the idea of creating a level playing field where competition is based on who can make the best, most durable products, not just who can secure the most government assistance.
That sounds a lot more sustainable in the long run.
Yeah.
What about the role of government in promoting research and development more broadly. Could that play a part in tackling these depreciation challenges?
Absolutely. Governments can play a significant role in funding basic research and creating partnerships between industry and academia to develop new technologies that directly address depreciation challenges.
So we're talking about things like government grants for university labs working on new materials, or programs that encourage companies to collaborate with national research institutions to develop cutting-edge manufacturing processes.
Exactly. By fostering an environment of innovation and collaboration, governments can help accelerate the development and adoption of depreciation-reducing technologies across a wide range of industries.
This all sounds very promising, but I have to ask, are there any potential downsides or challenges we should be aware of when it comes to implementing these types of policies?
Of course. Anytime you're dealing with complex systems like markets and economies, there's always the risk of unintended consequences. One challenge is ensuring that these policies are designed and implemented effectively so they achieve their intended goals without creating new problems.
So we need to be thoughtful about how these policies are crafted. We want to encourage innovation, but we also want to make sure we're not creating loopholes that could be exploited or distorting the market in ways that actually harm competition.
Precisely. It's about striking the right balance. And it's important to remember that reducing depreciation rates is not a quick fix. It's a long-term investment in a more sustainable and competitive economy. It requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to invest in long-term solutions, and a commitment from both the public and private sectors.
What strikes me about this whole conversation is that we've gone from this seemingly mundane accounting concept of depreciation to envisioning a future of self-healing spacecraft and super efficient solar farms.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this one factor can have such far-reaching implications.
It really is. And it just goes to show how important it is to look beyond the surface and understand the underlying forces that shape our world.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who want to dive even deeper into this fascinating topic, we'll be sure to share a link to the original research paper in the show notes.
Great idea. And as always, we encourage you to reach out with any questions or insights you might have. We're always eager to continue the conversation.
Okay. This has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from surprising link between depreciation and competition to the potential pitfalls of subsidies and the promise of these more innovative solutions. But before we wrap up, I want to bring us back to that point you made earlier about how this research challenges traditional economic models that often focus solely on fixed costs. Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. For a long time, economists have primarily focused on things like R&D spending, advertising budgets, and other fixed costs as the main drivers of competition. And while those are certainly important factors, this research highlights that we need to broaden our perspective.
So it's like we've been missing a piece of the puzzle this whole time.
Exactly. By bringing depreciation into the equation, we get a much more complete and nuanced understanding of how markets work, how companies compete, and ultimately how we can create a more dynamic and innovative economy. It's about recognizing the rate at which things wear out, something we often take for granted, can have a profound impact on the very structure of industries and the choices businesses make.
That's a really powerful insight. It's like we've been looking at the world through this narrow lens, and now we're starting to see the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners today. We need to be more curious, more willing to challenge our assumptions, and more open to exploring new ways of thinking about these complex economic issues.
I completely agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thought you'd like to leave our listeners with today? What's that nugget of wisdom they can carry with them as they go about their day?
I think the key message is this: depreciation matters. It's not just an accounting concept. It's a fundamental factor that shapes the competitive landscape and influences innovation. As we've discussed, there are potential solutions out there, but they require a shift in mindset, a willingness to invest in long-term sustainability, and a commitment to fostering innovation. It's about making things last, maximizing their value, and creating a more efficient and resilient economy.
I love that. Depreciation matters. It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to rethink how we approach everything from business strategy to public policy.
Yeah, it really is. And as we've seen, there's so much potential to unlock if we start taking depreciation seriously and invest in those solutions that reduce its impact. It's about creating a more sustainable and competitive future for everyone.
And what's exciting is that some of those solutions, like investing in more durable materials or promoting reusability, they're not just good for the economy, but they're good for the planet too. It's like a win-win.
Absolutely. Reducing depreciation goes hand in hand with a more sustainable approach to manufacturing and consumption. It's about making things last longer, using resources more efficiently, and minimizing waste.
Speaking of making things last longer, I remember you mentioned earlier that the paper touched on the idea of in-space repair. That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It might sound futuristic, but it's actually becoming a reality. There are companies developing robotic systems that can perform maintenance and repairs on satellites and other spacecraft while they're still in orbit.
Wow, so instead of just letting these expensive satellites become space junk after a few years, we could actually extend their lifespan significantly. That's incredible.
It is, and it highlights how innovation can play a key role in reducing depreciation, even in the most extreme environments.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to how much potential there is to reduce depreciation across, all sorts of industries. What are some other promising areas where we might see breakthroughs in the coming years?
Well, one area that's particularly exciting is materials science. Researchers are constantly developing new materials that are stronger, lighter, more durable, and even self-healing.
Self-healing materials. That sounds like something out of a comic book.
I know, it's amazing. Imagine bridges that can repair cracks on their own, or airplanes with wings that can mend minor damage in flight. These advancements could revolutionize how we design and build everything, leading to significant reductions in depreciation.
It's like we're on the cusp of a new era of ultra-durable products that could last for generations.
Mm-hmm. And that shift towards durability could have ripple effects throughout the entire economy. Think about it. If things last longer, we need to replace them less often, which means less waste, lower costs, and ultimately a more sustainable and efficient system.
It's a really inspiring vision of the future. And it all starts with this seemingly simple concept of depreciation.
It does, and I hope our listeners will walk away from this deep dive with a newfound appreciation for how this often overlooked factor can have such profound impact on our world.
Me too. It's been an incredibly enlightening conversation. So as we wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
I think the most important message is this. We have more power than we realize to shape a future where things last longer, where resources are used wisely, and where innovation drives us towards greater sustainability and prosperity. It starts with understanding the forces at play, like depreciation, and then taking action to create the world we want to live in.
Beautifully said. It's a message of empowerment, a call to action, and a reminder that even something as seemingly mundane as depreciation can start a journey of discovery and change. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, thank you for being a part of this exploration. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did. If you'd like to delve even deeper into this topic, we'll be sure to include a link to the research paper in the show notes. And, as always, we love hearing from you. Feel free to reach out on social media with your thoughts, questions, or any other mind-blowing insights you might have. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those depreciation rates low.